in the case of pteridophytes, they have the true roots, and in the case of bryophytes, they did not have a leaf or stem. They just had leaf-like structures and stem-like structures. So xylem, it is the water-conducting tissue, and the phloem is the food-conducting tissue. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to another session on chapter 3, that is Plant Kingdom. I'm Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session, under the Plant Kingdom, I had discussed about the bryophytes. So under bryophytes, we had studied the general characters of bryophytes, and I had told you why bryophytes are called as the amphibians of the plant kingdom, and we also studied about the reproduction and the characters of the two classes of bryophytes, that is the liverworts and the mosses. So in this particular session, we shall study about one more group of organisms under the plant kingdom, that is the pteridophytes. So these pteridophytes, they are usually terrestrial, and they also are found growing in moist soils, especially on the sides of the river bank. And the pteridophytes, they are abundantly found in the evergreen forest. Why is it so? We shall see. So pteridophytes, they are usually considered to be the first terrestrial plants that possess the xylem and the phloem. So I hope you know about what xylem and phloem is. So xylem, it is the water conducting tissue, and the phloem is the food conducting tissue. And it is said that pteridophytes are the first terrestrial plants to have produced the vascular tissues, that is the xylem and the phloem. And it is also said that all the other plants, that is the angiosperms especially, they have evolved or originated from the pteridophytes. And these pteridophytes, they usually prefer growing in cool, damp and shady places. And apart from this, they also grow well in sandy soil environment. So the best example is, you might have seen in the cracks of the wall or crevices of the wall, you can find these pteridophytes growing. So they also prefer sandy soil as well. And what this suggests is, majority of the pteridophytes, they prefer growing in cool, shady areas where there is moisture present or the area is damp. And when it comes to the uses of pteridophytes, they are used in the medicine preparation or the Ayurvedic preparation of a medicinal preparation since ages. That is, they are mainly used for medicinal purposes, and they are also good soil binders. That is, since they are good soil binders, or since they root very well into the soil, they are used especially in areas where soil erosion is more. Therefore, in order to prevent the soil erosion, therefore they are good soil binders, and also they are good ornamentals. Who doesn't love attending parties and functions, right? So in functions especially, you would have seen wherein flower decorations are done. So in the flower decorations, they especially use the fern leaves or the teres leaves because it looks attractive. So therefore, they are used as ornamentals. And the main best examples or the vast variety of pteridophytes that are present in vast is horsetails and the ferns. So these are the two important pteridophytes that are abundantly found, horsetail and the ferns. So next, moving on to the plant body. So the main plant body of pteridophyte is the sporophyte. Just like how the bryophytes, it had a sporophyte and the gametophyte. Similarly, these pteridophytes, they also have a sporophyte, and it is the major plant body, or sporophyte occupies the majority of the position in the plant body. So the main plant body is a sporophyte, and when you look at a pteridophyte plant, unlike the bryophytes, the pteridophytes, they usually are differentiated into a true root, into a true stem and leaves. Whereas in bryophytes, they did not have a true root. There, the roots were called as the rhizoids. But in the case of pteridophytes, they have the true roots. And in the case of bryophytes, they did not have a leaf or stem. They just had leaf-like structures and stem-like structures. But in the case of pteridophytes, they have true leaves as well as stem. So true root, leaves and stem. Apart from that, they possess a well differentiated vascular tissue. So I had earlier told you that they are the first known terrestrial plants to have the vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. So therefore, the pteridophytes, they have the water conducting tissue xylem and the food conducting tissue phloem. So therefore, they have a well differentiated vascular tissue, and the leaves are of two types. So some of the plants, they possess the microphyls. So micro means small. So micro means small and phyl means leaf. Phylls mean leaf. So some pteridophytes, they possess very small leaves. The best example is Selaginella. So you can see the leaves of Selaginella. They are micro. So they are very, very small. They are minute. They are micro. So that is why it is called as microphylls. And in the case of ferns, that is the terrace. So all these ferns, all of you would have seen either in decorative purposes or also whenever you have visited a riverside or any estates or anything, you would have seen this. So they have macrosporophylls or not sporophylls, macrophylls. Here phyll means leaf, macro means large. So they have macrophylls. They have macrophylls. So the leaves can be either microphylls as in the case of Selaginella, and the leaves can be macrophylls as in the case of terrace or the ferns. So this is about the plant body. And roots, as I told you, they have a true root. So these are the roots of, they have true roots, they have true stem and they have true leaves. And the true stem and all that is clearly visible in the case of terrace or the ferns. So this is about the plant body. So next, moving on to the gametophyte. So we discussed about the sporophyte, which is nothing but the plant body. Then we'll move on to the gametophyte. So pteridophytes, they are not found growing everywhere. They require a certain condition. They require a condition in which the area is always moist or damp. Why? Because if the gametophytic generation of the pteridophyte has to progress, then the area should be moist. So therefore, pteridophytes are restricted to only certain areas. So if you go to the Western Ghats side, be it Kerala, Coorg, all those regions, you can find abundant pteridophytes growing there. Why? Because only that particular environment is suitable for the pteridophyte. So pteridophyte, as I told you, you can find them growing in Mysuru regions as well. Some of in few buildings where there are cracks and all that, if the spores come and fall there, they will germinate and they will grow. But they will not have a gametophytic stage. Why? Because for gametophytic stage to progress, water is always needed, or cool damp condition is needed. So this gametophytic stage of pteridophytes, or the gametophyte of pteridophytes, they require a cool, damp, shady place to grow, and therefore because of this restricted requirement, it should be there. If it is not there, then the gametophyte will not at all develop. So because of the above requirement, or because of this particular requirement wherein it requires a cool, shady, moist or damp place to grow, it is not found anywhere in all the habitats. It is restricted only to certain limited areas. Therefore, it is restricted to narrow geographical areas. That is, I told you, usually it is found in the evergreen forest or the Western Ghats. So, therefore, this gametophyte is very, very specific if it has to grow. So that is why they are restricted to only certain geographical areas where that condition is provided for the gametophyte to develop. So this is about the gametophyte. So moving on to further, what are the gametophytes? Gametes, gametophyte, the plant body which produces the gametes. So they are the gametophyte. So when you think of gametes, what comes to the mind? The female gamete and the male gamete. So here the male sex organs are the antheridia. The antheridia is the one which produces the male gamete, and the female sex organ is the archegonia. So archegonia produces the female gamete. So here you can see the male gamete, that is the antheridia, and the female gamete, that is the archegonium. So archegonium. So if this, as you see, this gametophytic generation, if it has to develop, then cool, moist, shady places are needed. Otherwise, the pteridophyte plants will grow just like that without the gametophytic generation or the gametophytic stage. Only the sporophyte will develop, that is the plant body will develop as such. So here the male gamete. So once the antheridia releases the male gamete will move in the water and it will reach the mouth of the female gamete, or it will reach the mouth of the archegonium. So what is the archegonium? It is the organ that produces the female gamete. So what the male gametes which are released, the antheridia, it will release the male gamete. The male gamete will swim in the water and it will reach the mouth of the archegonia, or the opening of it will reach the mouth of the archegonia. Once it reaches the mouth of the archegonia, the male gamete will fuse with the female gamete present in the archegonium. Fusion will take place, and after the fusion, what happens? Fertilization will occur. So that will produce the zygote. It is just like the bryophytes. Only thing is the way that it happens, it is different. So here again the zygote will develop. So the zygote, which is further produced, it will undergo division to produce a multicellular well differentiated sporophyte. So same like bryophyte, here also reproduction will take place the same way. So the zygote will produce a multicellular sporophyte. So those sporophytes which are having multiple cells, and few of the cells will develop into the plant body, that is the zygote will develop into the sporophyte. Again from the sporophyte the gametophyte will develop, again like that the cycle will continue. This is how the reproduction usually takes place. So now moving on to, I told you the sporophytes will be developed. So what are these sporophytes? So from where the sporophytes will be developed? The male and the female gamete will fuse. That is the male gamete, it will move towards the mouth of the archegonia and it will fuse with the female gamete. Then the zygote will develop and the zygote will undergo division to form a multicellular sporophyte. So these sporophytes bear structures called the sporangia. Now these sporangia are the reproductive structures. In the sporangia, they have the sporophylls. So phyll, again here, leaf. So what are sporophylls? Those leaf-like structures that bear the spores are nothing but the sporophylls. So the sporophytes, they bear the sporangia that are present in leaf-like structures called as the sporophylls. So you can see here, these are leaf-like structures. So if you observe very clearly, you can see the sporophyll, they are leaf-like structures. Here also you can see very clearly, you can see leaf-like structures, small tiny leaf-like structures. So in these leaf-like structures, the sporophylls, they come together and they form the strobili. So you can see here each sporophyll which are leaf-like. To look at the structure, no, it is leaf-like and it bears the spores. That is why it is called a sporophyll. So each sporophyll, one single sporophyll will join together and it will form the strobili or cone-like structures. These look like a cone. Have you seen Pinus cone? It is used for decorative purposes. Just like a cone it looks like the Pinus cone, and it is called as the strobili. So these sporophylls, they come together, each single sporophyll, they come together, they form compact structures called strobili, and they are also called as cone. The best example is, I've given here equisetum. So here I've taken the example of equisetum and selaginella. Equisetum and selaginella. So you can see here in selaginella also, clearly you can see strobili. So the same thing here also you can see strobili, different strobili. Number of strobili are present at the tip of the leaf. What is sporangia? Where are the sporangia produced? The sporangia produced in the sporophyll. So in the sporangia, the spores are produced, and in the sporangia there are the microspore mother cells. So I hope you know about the reproduction in the flowering plants. So in flowering plants, the pollen grains are produced. So where are the pollen grains produced? In the pollen mother cell. Just like that here also, where are the spores produced? The spores are produced in spore mother cells. So the spore mother cells undergoes meiosis or reduction division to produce the spores. So these spores later on, they germinate and they give rise to inconspicuous small multicellular free living photosynthetic thalloid gametophytes, which are called as the prothallus. So what it means? What does the spores produce? The spores germinate and they produce the prothallus. So this is the sporophyte. So once the prothallus is produced, it is nothing but the production of a new offspring or the progeny. So the spores, they produce inconspicuous. So inconspicuous means they are very tiny. You cannot see them very clearly. They are very tiny. So they are very tiny. That is why they are very small. They are multicellular, made up of more than one cell, and they are free living, and they usually are photosynthetic and they form the prothallus. So this prothallus is the one which develops into a new organism or a new plant body in the case of the pteridophytes. So next, moving on to, I told you spores are produced. So where are the spores produced? How are the spores produced? So the sporophylls, they contain sporangia. In the sporangia, the spore mother cells up there, these spore mother cells, they undergo meiosis division to produce the spores. So spores, they are usually of two types. Two types of spores can be produced in different species of pteridophytes. But the majority of the pteridophytes, they produce spores which are homosporous. Homo means similar. They look alike. You cannot differentiate between them because they look almost same to each other. So those pteridophytes, so majority of the pteridophytes, they produce spores which are similar to each other. That is why it is homosporous. And some of the pteridophytes, such as the Selaginella and Salvinia, they produce heterosporous. Hetero means different. Homo means same. Hetero means different. So those spores which are different, that is, one of the spore will be large and the other one will be small. Therefore, when you look at the spore, you can say which is large, which is small. You can differentiate. You can tell the difference between the two spores, right? So such spores are nothing but heterosporous. So heterosporous, in the case of heterosporous, one will be macrospore, that is, one will be large macrospore and the other will be micro, small. So these are heterosporous. So two types of spores can be produced, homosporous and heterosporous. So I have given the example here. You can see the spores in Salvinia. So this is Salvinia plant, Salvinia pteridophyte plant, and this is Selaginella. You can see spore here. So these spores are produced. So spores will get produced. So here these megaspores, they germinate and give rise to the female gametophyte and the microspores. So megaspores, always remember, in the case of plants and animals, that which is large, it will always relate to the female. So here again, those megaspores, that is the larger spores, will germinate and it will give rise to the female gametophyte, and the microspores will give rise to the male gametophyte. So the female gametophyte, they are retained. They are usually retained in the plant. And what happens here when the male gametophyte, so the microspores, they produce the male gametophyte. So these male gametophyte, again, they will produce the gamete and it will move towards the female gametophyte and it will fuse with the female gamete. Again, the zygote will be produced. The zygote will again undergo reduction division and produce the sporophyte. Again, the sporophyte will produce the prothallus, and again the prothallus, from there again the spores will be produced. So this is how the cycle continues. The cycle of the life cycle of the pteridophyte or the reproduction of the pteridophyte continues this way. So this is about the spores. So next, moving on to the development. So I told you, once the spores, that is the spores are produced. So these spores, what happens when the megaspore will produce the female gametophyte, the microspore will produce the male gametophyte. So the male gametophyte will release the male gamete. So that male gamete, it will swim towards the female gamete and it will fuse that is female gametophyte, and the female gamete that is present inside the female gametophyte, it will fuse, and once fusing occurs, fertilization will take place and the development of the zygote will take place. So that zygote will start developing into the young embryo, and that all this process will occur where? Inside the female gametophyte. So the male gamete will move towards the female gamete, it will fuse with the female gamete that is present inside the female gametophyte. Once inside the female gametophyte itself the fusion occurs, zygote will be formed. That zygote again it will develop into embryo, and that is how the pteridophytes are formed. So that embryo is the one which develops into a new plant body or a new pteridophyte. It is almost similar to that of a reproduction that takes place in the plant, but in plants the ovule and the pollen grain are involved. In this case, the male gamete and the female gamete separate, that is related to the pteridophyte, is involved. So this is about the reproduction, how it takes place in the pteridophytes by the fusion of the male and the female gamete, resulting in the formation of the zygote, and the zygote then developing into the young embryo, and the embryo then developing into a new progeny or a new pteridophyte plant. So there are different types of pteridophytes. So again, how bryophytes were classified into two types, that is the liverworts and the mosses. Just like that, there are 4 classes of pteridophytes that are present. So the first class is Psilopsida. So first class is Psilopsida. So the first class is Psilopsida. The best example is Psilotum. So I have shown here Psilotum. So this is the best example for Psilopsida. The next class is Lycopsida. So it is easy to remember the example. If they ask, write one example, Lycopsida, Lycopodium, it is easy to remember. So the best example for Lycopsida. So this is the second class of pteridophyte. We have Selaginella, Lycopodium. So it is easy to remember. Next, the third class of pteridophyte, it is called as Spinopsida. So the best example for Spinopsida is Equisetum. And when there is one more class, that is the fourth class of pteridophytes, that is Pteropsida. And Pteropsida is very vast. It is abundantly more you find Pteropsida growing in most of the places. The best example is Dryopteris. So Dryopteris, you usually find them growing on trees, and it is brown in color. So those who come from areas which belong to the Western Ghats, right, there you find abundant of Dryopteris. Then Pteris, all of you have seen because they are ferns. Ferns, you all know about ferns. So Pteris, and one more is Adiatum. Adiatum is also kind of fern-like, but it is larger. So Adiatum, like Pteris and Adiatum, there is a minute difference. So Adiatum, they have larger leaves than the leaflets or leaves when compared to the Pteris. So the 4 classes of pteridophytes: Psilopsida, Lycopsida, Spinopsida, and Pteropsida. So this was about pteridophytes. So I hope you understood the general classes of pteridophytes. Then we had studied the general characteristics of the pteridophytes, and also I told you they are the first terrestrial plants to have developed the vascular tissues, that is the xylem and the phloem. And we also studied their general characteristics, how reproduction takes place in pteridophytes. Here, the sporophytic generation is the major plant body, and then the gametophyte will develop. In the gametophyte, the male gamete will fuse with the female gamete, resulting in the formation of the zygote. The zygote then develops into the embryo, and the embryo further matures into a plant body. So this is how the reproduction occurs. So we shall meet again in the next class. I hope you understood this session well. In the next class, we shall study about the gymnosperms. So gymnosperms are one of the oldest known plants to be living. Even in the dinosaur era itself, the gymnosperms were present. So we shall study in detail about one of the forms of plants that is present on this earth, that is the gymnosperms. So we shall meet in the next coming session. Thank you.